Okay, we're going to look at preterite conjugations again. Again, the preterite tense is the simple past tense, and we've already learned how to conjugate regular verbs, AR, ER, and IR verbs, in the preterite or past tense. But there's a small category of verbs that are irregular when we go to conjugate them into the past tense. So let's take a look at these verbs. Okay, so the first group I want to look at are AR verbs. These are AR verbs, and they end in either GAR, CAR, or ZAR. And there's only a few of these. They're in your book. Get familiar with them. When you go to conjugate these verbs and put them into the preterite tense, the yo form only is irregular. So the to form, the el form, the nosotros form, the ellos forms, those are all regular. We already know how to conjugate regular AR verbs. But the yo form of any verb ending in gar, car, or zar is going to be irregular. So let's look at some of these verbs. Let's look at the verb pagar. It's an AR verb, okay? And let's see what happens here when we go to conjugate it in the preterite or past tense. So let's look at the to form, because I told you the yo forms are regular. Let's just look at the to form. So it would be tu pagaste. How do we conjugate a verb in the preterite tense? We get the stem, so we drop the AR. Pag, what is the ending that always goes with tu in the preterite? It's aste. We learned that already. So tu pagaste. Now let's do the L form. The stem will be pag. What ending goes with el? It's an AR verb. It's an O. Pagó. Él pagó. He paid. What about nosotros? We get the stem. Nosotros pag. What's the ending? Amos. We learned this already. And then let's look at the ellos or ustedes form, the they form. And again, we're going to have the stem pag. And we would add on aron. Ellos pagaron. They paid. So tú pagaste, you paid. Él pagó, he paid. We paid. Nosotros pagamos. And they paid. Ellos pagaron. You should know those endings. Now, but this is a verb that ends in gar. So the yo form is going to be irregular. Here's the little tip or clue. The G of the stem will go to gu when we go to conjugate it. So it's yo pague. Okay, so we insert a u in there. And there's just a few of these. Make sure you're aware of them. Okay, let's look at the next class of AR verbs that are irregular when we put them in the preterite form, in the yo form. Okay, so these are verbs that end in car, C-A-R. So the C of the stem is going to go to QU. Let's take a look. First, we'll do the to form. The normal stem would be practique. The ending for to would be aste, to practicaste. Again, for el, practique, and the ending will be an O. Practicó, he practiced. Nosotros practicamos, we add on. We practiced, and ellos practicaron. Okay, practique and aron. Again, we learned these endings. These are the AR endings. We have an AR verb, and the subject pronoun determines what the endings will be. But let's look at the yo ending. Now, because the verb ends in car, okay, we're going to have a little bit of a change here. So let's take a look. The C will go to QU. So it's yo practique, not with a C, but with a QU. All right. And there's one more category. These are verbs that end in ZAR, and the Z of the stem will go to C only for the yo conjugation. So let's take a look at the verb empezar. You should all know it. It's the verb to begin, but we want to put it in the preterite or past tense. So you began would be tú empezaste. The stem is empez. The ending is aste. He began is él empezó. He began. Empezó. We began is nosotros empezamos. And they began is ellos empezaron. Again, this verb ends in zar, so the yo form is going to have a spelling change. and the Z will go to C. And there's only a few of these verbs that we're responsible for. Yo empecé. We put it with a C, not a Z. Let's do a couple practice problems here. These will be on your test. I'll be testing you on these sorts of verbs. So we want to conjugate the verb in parentheses in the preterite tense. So we have Bob empezar la clase. Empezar means to begin. So we want to say Bob began the class. Will there be any changes here or anything unique? No. It's a zar verb, but only in the yo form is there a change in the spelling. Only in the yo form, but the rest of the verb is not changed for any of the other subject pronouns. And okay, so let's take a look. Bob empezó. The stem is empez, and there's no spelling change. The Z doesn't change to a C, it just stays the same. Okay, here's comenzar. Comenzar ends in zar. We want to put it in the preterite. Now what's our subject? It's yo. Will there be a spelling change? Yes. All verbs that end in either gar, kar, or zar will have a spelling change in the yo form. So the Z will change to a C. So yo empecé. I'm sorry, my mistake here. It should read yo comencé la tarea, but it's the same idea. Empezar and comenzar mean the same thing. So what I should have put here should have been comencé with a CE ending. But let's move on. Pagar. I've got yo pagar mucho dinero. We want to put it in the preterite tense. Will there be any spelling changes? Yes, it ends in gar. And so in the yo form, there's always a spelling change. Let's take a look. Yo pagué. The G goes to GU. What about two? So in three it says yo pagué mucho dinero. I spent or paid. I paid a lot of money. In the next one, we've got you paid little. Will it be any kind of spelling change? No. It's even though it ends in gar, it's the two form. So it's just the regular pag and aste ending. And then the last one, we've got anoche yo, and let's take a look. And unfortunately, this is covered up. The verb is practicar. Will there be a spelling change? Yes, it's got a car ending. The C changes to QU. So anoche means last night. Yo, I practiced. Anoche yo practiqué. So the C changes to QU. So take a look at these. They're in your book. There's just a few of them. Make sure that you can do them. All right. Now, the next area of irregular verbs. Okay. And let's take a look at these. And you're going to be expected to know these and to recognize them on your exam. There's just a few. Again, they're in your book. Let's take a look. So the verbs that end in IR, okay, verbs that are IR stem changers. We've learned quite a few of these verbs back in the first semester. These are verbs that in the present tense have a stem change that end in IR. Let's, for example, pedir, to request or ask for. If you recall, the E of the stem went to I, yo pido, okay? So that's what we're talking about. We had one of these verbs has an O in the stem, and the O went to UE, like dormir. It's got to be an IR stem changer, so it was yo duermo. So these verbs that had stem changes in the present tense, and they must end in IR, will have a slight spelling change in the preterite tense. And the spelling change only will occur in the L or ea form and the ellos form. So the third person singular, el, ella, or the third person plural, ellos, ustedes. This is where there will be a spelling change. So pay attention. It's in your book. Let's take a look. So again, we're working with verbs that in the present tense have a stem change, okay, and that end in IR. Let's see what happens in the preterite tense. Okay, so pedir, it's in a stem changing IR verb. It's going to have a spelling change when we put it in the preterite, and there's going to be two stems. Okay, there's going to be the original stem. Normally when we form the preterite tense of any verb, we just take the regular stem. We drop the ER, IR, or AR. In this case, we drop the IR. So the stem would normally be ped, but this is a unique class of verbs, and there's just going to be a second stem, ped. The E of the stem will go to I. We have two stems. Let's see how it conjugates. So the O form is normal. It's the regular stem, ped, and then you put the preterite endings on, okay? And the preterite endings are all the regular preterite endings we learned already. Yo for an IR verb takes an I ending. So yo pedi means I requested. What about tu? The same thing. There's no stem change. We just use the regular stem change as we do when we conjugate normal verbs in the preterite, when we conjugate regular verbs in the preterite. So it's ped, and the ending for IR verbs in the preterite is iste. We already learned that. So tu pediste, you asked for or you requested. Let's go on to nosotros. No stem change. Nosotros pedimos. Okay, we requested. Now, there is going to be a stem change in the L and A form. That is the third person singular. And the E will go to I. So, él pidió. He requested. Right? So it's not él pidió, it's él pidió. Please note this down. Okay? And then finally, I told you the stem change will take place in the el, ella conjugation, the third person singular, and the third person plural, the ellos, ustedes form. Ellos pidieron. Notice the endings are just your regular preterite endings. The change occurs in the stem of the el-ella form and of the ellos form. The E of the stem goes to I. Let's take a look at another verb, divertirse. If you look at the verb divertirse, you might see the word diversion. Okay, it's to have fun. We have the adjective divertido. Okay, and it's reflexive. Okay, so we have the reflexive pronoun se. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. First of all, it's an IR verb, so we want to get the stem of it. We want to put it in the preterite tense, correct? So the regular stem would be divert. Divert. I just dropped the IR. But this verb in the present tense has a stem change. Okay, so when we go to put it in the preterite, there's going to be a stem change in the L, A form, and in the Eos form. The E of the stem will go to I. And so we get this new stem, divirt. And the divirt will go to the LA form and the Eos form. Let's take a look. It's reflexive, so I have to include the reflexive pronouns. You should all know your reflexive pronouns. So literally, I diverted myself or I had fun. Yo me divertí. I use divert, the regular stem. Normally, again, whenever I conjugate a verb in the preterite, I just get the regular stem. I drop the IR ending, and I add on an I. So yo me divert. What about the tu form? Again, I use the divert, that first stem. So tú te divertiste. I put an iste ending on because it's the preterite of an IR verb. Now let's go to nosotros. Again, I use the regular stem, divirt. Nosotros nos divertimos. We had a good time. Again, this is in the preterite. Now let's look at the LA form. Will there be a stem change? Yes. These are IR stem changers. So they will always have a stem change in the LA form. And the E goes to what? It goes to I. So Él se divirtió. And notice that IO ending, that's the universal ending that we always add on when the subject is él or ella in the preterite of an IR verb. And finally, the last subject pronoun will be ellos. Will there be a stem change? Yes, there always is a stem change with the él form and the ellos form. So ellos se divirtieron. So this stuff is a little picky. Look over these verbs. There's a few of them. Preferir, sugerir, pedir. Make sure that you can conjugate them in the preterite tense, that you remember to make that stem change, to change the E to I and the L and ellos form. Okay, and then let's look. There's also IR stem changers that have an O in them, and we only had one, and that was dormir. That's what we learned last semester. And if you recall, dormir is a stem changer in the present tense. It's in the present tense, it's yo duermo. Okay, so it does have a stem change in the present tense, but we want to put it in the preterite. It's an IR verb. So again, we're going to have two stems. We're going to have our regular stem, dorm, and our new stem, durm. In the case of IR verbs in the preterite, the O will go to U. In the case of IR verbs that have an E, the E went to I, and now we have just one verb in this category, just learn it. The O goes to U in the preterite. In the present tense, the O went to UE, but we're not in the present tense now, we're in the preterite. So let's go ahead and conjugate it. Let's do the yo form, and it's yo, dor, mi. I use the original stem dorm. What about tú? Tú dormiste. I use the original stem. What about nosotros? Dorm. Nosotros dormimos. We slept. What about he or she? Will there be a stem change? Yes, there always is with IR stem changes in the preterite. In this case, it's a verb has an O in it. The O goes to you, so it'll be él durmió. He slept. Not él dormió, it's él durmió. What about ellos? Will there be a stem change? Yes, there always is one in the ellos form. The O goes to you for O-bearing verbs. So it's ellos durmieron. Notice the endings on all these verbs are your classical universal endings that we put on IR verbs in preterite tense. Let's do a quick practice. And it says conjugate the verb in the preterite. So we've got to conjugate these verbs in the preterite tense. So we have yo preferir la fruta. We want to say I preferred the fruit. So it is an IR verb. It's a stem changer in the present tense. That's true. But will there be a stem change in this case when we go to put it in the preterite in yo? No. Again, IR stem changers only have a stem change in the preterite in the el, ella form, or the ellos form, in none of the other forms. So we're going to just use the regular stem as we normally would when we conjugate a regular verb in the preterite tense. So the stem is prefer. And then what ending always goes with IR verbs? What ending always goes with yo? You should know it by now. Y. Yo preferí la fruta. I preferred the fruit. Look at number 2. We want to say they preferred la carne. They preferred the meat. We want to put it in the preterite tense. Now look at that verb preferir. And I'm sorry, there is a spelling here change. A spelling error here. It should be preferir, IR ending, but it's good actually that there is this slight typo here just to bring this to your attention. You need to be aware whether you're dealing with an AR, ER, and IR verb. Again, this is a mistake. There is no such verb as preferir. It's preferir, as is written in number 1. So we want to say ellos preferir la carne. So it's an IR verb. Will there be a stem change when we go to put it in the preterite tense? Yes, there always is with ellos. So the E of the stem goes to I. So it'll be ellos prefirieron. And the ieron is the normal ending for IR verbs in the eos form. Let's look at the next verb. Sugerir, it's in chapter 6. It's to suggest, like the waiter might suggest a food. Chapter 6 has to do with eating, dining, eating out at a restaurant. And there are some passages in that chapter where the waiter suggests different foods or recommends different foods. So we have an IR verb, okay? Sugerir is a stem changer in the present tense. And so, but will there be a stem change when we go to put it in the preterite with yo? No, we'll just use the regular stem, which is suger. So yo sugeri. And what is the ending that always goes with yo for I verbs? It's an I. Let's look at the next one. What about Bob? And we've got sugerir again. Bob suggests ensalada is salad. He suggests salad. Will there be or you want to put it in the preterite, Bob suggested salad. When we go to conjugate this in the preterite, will there be a change in the stem? Yes, there will be, because Bob is the LA form, so the E will go to I, so it will be sugirió. Bob sugirió la ensalada. And then finally, the last one is anoches. We've got the verb dormir. All right, so we want to say last night they slept. Will it be a stem change? Yes, there always is with ellos. The verb has an O in it. It's the only one that we have, the only IR verb we have with an O in it right now. And the O will go to you. Ellos durmieron. Ellos durmieron. Um, uh, and there are some new verbs in chapter 6 that you may want to look at. Okay. Finally, I wanted to bring out one other area. What about AR and ER stem changers? What about those? If we put those into the preterite tense, is there a stem change? Or do we just use the regular stem of the verb and then put on the preterite endings? There is no stem change in the preterite tense for AR and ER verbs. It only happens with IR verbs, only IR. So let's take a look. Let's look at the verb volver. It's a stem changer in the present tense, but it only has one stem. Volver means to return. I returned is yo volví. You returned is tú volviste. He returned, él volvió. We returned, nosotros volvimos. And they returned, ellos volvieron. Notice there is no stem change, even though it's a stem changing verb in the present tense that has nothing to do with the preterite. We just use the regular stem. Okay, it is an ER verb. Never do they have a stem change, and the endings are the normal IR preterite endings. Yo takes I, tú takes iste, él takes io, nosotros takes imos, and ellos takes ieron in the preterite tense. What about pensar? It's a stem changer. Yo pienso, but it ends in an AR, so there is no stem change. We just use the regular stem when we conjugate it in the preterite tense. So yo pensé, tú pensaste, él pensó, nosotros pensamos, and ellos pensaron. Again, we just use the regular stem. And then please, again, you should know these universal endings for AR verbs in the preterite. Yo takes e, tú takes aste, él takes o, nosotros, and there's a spelling error, there's an o is missing there, but nosotros pensamos and ellos pensaron. Okay, that does it for, I believe, the preterite tense. Again, so by now you should be able to conjugate all regular verbs that end in AR, ER, and IR. You should be able to conjugate them in the preterite tense. Then you should know these few exceptions. IR stem changers in the L and in the eos form will have a stem change. The E of the stem will go to I, or the O of the stem can go to U. And then finally, AR verbs that end in car, gar, and zar we'll have a spelling change in the preterite tense in the yo form, okay? And just be familiar with that. And that's it for our lesson.